Blog Talk Radio.
Namaste, everybody. Welcome to the March 26th edition of Nature of Reality Radio. I am your host, Andrew Fisher, and we are broadcasting every Wednesday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern, exposing the true and false nature of reality in the past, present, and future. And we will be exposing the false and what should be the true official version of the past for the most part today, because we have Michael Cremo on. He's best known as the author of the book Forbidden Arqueology, which talks about stuff that mainstream history and science suppresses in regards to what history is supposed to be like. He's also a regular guest on the show Ancient Aliens, although I don't think he appears on that show as much now as he used to back in the day. But he's a very interesting guy, to say the least, and I'm glad to see he tries to get extraterrestrial conversation involved in his work, because when it comes down to it, there's no other explanation than that when it comes to the way the past really is. I do believe this is him, area code 310 on the line here, and we will get him on momentarily. But first, I will spend about 8 minutes max on the news, courtesy of Alex Jones and company at InfoWars. Ukraine crisis. How much war does Washington want? The propaganda that the rest represents the hope of the world is a great lie. I've said it a zillion times already when I cover the news at the beginning of every show, and I'll say it again. The United States of America is the Roman Empire of the modern era. We invade other countries more than any other country on planet Earth, and many people don't seem to understand that because they believe America is the land of the free. It's the most lawless country in the world, people. I hate to say it. But what do we have next? Soylent Green company wants you to eat your favorite celebrity. Company wants to make salami from celebrity body tissue. Okay, kind of creepy, isn't it? Well, there are some tribes out there in the rainforest that do eat humans. They do believe cannibalism is a good way to prevent food from going to waste. They say, what's the point of letting a person die? What's the point of, if someone dies, there's no sense in doing anything other than eat them, or else it's a total waste. Well, that's frowned upon by much of society. But, wow, I don't even think I want to know what this company is. But anyway, moving on. CIA, Al-Qaeda using Syria as base of operations to attack West. U.S. government publicly runs Al-Qaeda, and so does British intelligence and the Saudi Arabian government to a great extent. And says your U.S. specializes in creating terror threats, then used to steal your liberty. Yeah. Invade a country with Al-Qaeda, you're leading Al-Qaeda, say, we need to invade that country because it's being invaded by Al-Qaeda. And then they go to invade that country under the guise of fighting for freedom, and they say, we need to take your rights because of terror threats like Al-Qaeda, when they're the ones running it all along. I know I'm preaching to the choir to some of you, but there are people out there who still don't understand this. Next article. Rand Paul, why can't Obama unilaterally end NSA spying? Since when has the president waited for congressional authority to do anything? Yeah, Obama is the most dictatorial president of all time, no questions asked. And if he can sign anything to the law as he wants, let me make it clear, an executive order is null and void if it applies outside the executive branch of government. It's in our Constitution. The president is not supposed to be a dictator. He's supposed to be a quarterback who calls the shots, and his teammates in Congress and the Supreme Court, and Congress is supposed to have the most authority because they're the most diverse, are supposed to decide whether or not the president's plays are valid, but Obama seems to think he can sign anything to the law. So why doesn't he unilaterally end NSA spying? Oh, yeah, that's right, because we need to spy on you to keep you safe. NSA spying is not about safety. It's about preventing whistleblowers from coming out. It's about keeping you in a state of fear and helplessness and suppressing your consciousness, because that's what spying on you does all the time. And it's also used for insider trading, as a matter of fact. See what people are going to do so you can predict the future, and then you can engage in insider trading. So it got nothing to do with safety. And Alex Collier says there is extraterrestrial involvement with the NSA in regards to gray aliens. Maybe we'll talk about that in the show at some point. No, I don't know. It's not really Michael Cremo's work there. But anyway, video report, 8 herbs changed this man's life. This guy's supporting super male vitality. That stuff InfoWars sells. It's supposed to make men feel really, really special and really upbeat, balance out their testosterone levels. Well, they're trying to suppress male and female consciousness on planet Earth, the powers that be are, especially the female energy, because Mother Earth is a feminine energy dominant planet. And this super male vitality, it may enhance male consciousness a little bit. I'm sure it does. So, hey, If any of you men listening want to upbeat in your life, try Super Male Vitality from InfoWars. But what do we have here? Facebook accused of astroturfing Reddit to silence criticism. Did company hire web trolls to game comments after Oculus purchase? I don't really have time to look into what this is all about, but Facebook, they are a New World Order front group in many ways. To monitor what people are doing, helps the NSA to a great extent. Facebook does, censors people. Let me make it clear. Facebook advertises as a comments. If you post within their rules, they cannot selectively ban people who post within their rules. If they do, they must change their rules because they advertise as a comments. The fact that they're privately owned is beside the point. Their selective censorship is illegal. It's false advertising. Got that? False advertising, and I've been victimized by that a few times. But point is here, did the company hire web trolls? Well, a company would probably hire trolls, just like the government hires trolls to keep things from becoming public, things like extraterrestrial cover-up and forbidden archaeology that we're not supposed to know about. All right, 2 more articles before I get Cremo on here. Customer with gun rescues Home Depot security guard from syringe attack. Let this be a lesson. Never bring a dirty syringe to a gunfight. Well, if you wanted to learn all about dirty syringes, listen to my interview I did a couple weeks ago with Leslie Manoukian, the producer of the documentary The Greater Good, which talks about the true dangers of vaccines, why you should never take vaccines, flu shots, and in regards to guns, if we lose the Second Amendment, we lose everything, people. You need to have guns. You're better off having a gun unless you do not believe in using violence to escalate violence. Those who do not believe in using violence to escalate violence will probably be better off without a gun, but the Founding Fathers put the Second Amendment in our Constitution so we could protect ourselves from tyrannical government. And you have to likely understand that, people. Please do, or else we're in trouble. Former Blackwater mercenaries hired as thought police in eastern Ukraine, hired to suppress protest mood and neutralize leaders and activists. Yeah, control leaders to make sure you go along with the New World Order's plans and make sure activists don't get the truth out and rile up the public to go against the government. Look, you can make this whole thing about Ukraine whatever you will about whether or not Russia should have gotten the Crimea like it did. Crimea was sort of like what Puerto Rico is to the United States. That's what Crimea was to Russia, even though it's part of the Ukraine. So, I mean, I think it's better, of course, that Crimea joins Russia than it does the European Union, considering the European Union is a stepping stone to global government. And we don't want global government, because by that I do not mean a democratic government or a Republican government. I mean a totalitarian government or authoritarian at the best. All right, so that's it with the news now. So without further ado, I would like to, I believe this is Michael Cremo. Let's see if it is. Area code 310, Michael Cremo, is that you?
Yes, it is.
How you doing, Michael, or should I say Druta Karmadasa, to show you respect for your religious. Did I pronounce it correctly? That's your devotional name,
yes,
right?
Yes, you did. That's my spiritual name that I got from my spiritual master.
Yeah, because it said that on Wikipedia, and, well, you know Wikipedia, you really can't trust it, certainly not when it comes to extraterrestrial stuff, but I'm glad they gave you credit, give them credit for that one, for showing respect for your faith. But, Michael, I'm glad to have you on. We're going to, for the most part, try to keep it archaeological-based and not extraterrestrial-based, but, of course, you know extraterrestrial has to come up in conversation because, as I explained in the introduction, there's no other explanation for the way the forbidden archaeology you've described actually is. But before we get into what the true nature of forbidden archaeology actually is, let's talk about who is suppressing the true history of planet Earth's true history. Who is suppressing it, and why are they suppressing that? To the best of your knowledge, please explain that.
Well, the scientists who are supporters of the current dominant theories of human origins have managed to convince governments around the world to give them a monopoly in the education system. And basically, they are giving very materialistic answers to the question, who are we, where did we come from? Basically, they're saying we're machines made of molecules in competition with each other for survival, financial survival, political survival. And this is a very useful idea for powerful, influential circles in the world today, because what it does is it gives people an extremely materialistic set of values, so that they think that to produce and consume more and more material things as part of competing groups is the main purpose of human life. So there are powerful forces in the world today that benefit from that. They benefit from the huge amounts of wealth that are generated by that intense concentration on material production and consumption. And, they want to see it continue. If we had other ideas about our human identity and origins, then we would have a different set of values. For example, if we understood, hey, we're all beings of pure consciousness who have temporarily come under the spell of the material energy, and our main purpose in human life should be to satisfy our material needs in the most simple, natural, fair, and efficient way possible, while putting most of our human energy into developing the resource of consciousness, that would be very bad for the people who are now very, behind the scenes controlling this world. They would rather see everybody working hard as part of competing groups engaged in conflict with each other and competition for economic survival. That's all very beneficial for their interests. That's the way that I would see it. So that's why I think there are those who really do not want to see what the real history of our human species is, because if we knew the real history, we'd see that the current explanations of human origins just don't work, and we're going to need new explanations, which would result in an entirely different set of goals, values, and things of that sort.
Okay, thanks for covering that. And I think we might as well start this show off with a bang. Atlantis and Lemuria. I've heard you talk about that on Ancient Aliens. There was one segment I remember where you talked about how Atlantis is associated with the god Poseidon. There's still debate over whether or not Poseidon was a real extraterrestrial or whether he was a fictional entity that was either made up by malevolent forces or is a fictional entity based on some real-life person that actually lived, which some people think is the case with Jesus. But the thing with Atlantis, you did say it's associated with Poseidon, but my understanding of it is Atlantis existed before the cataclysm that happened during the summer solstice equinox that happens. There's a 26,000-year cycle, and then we just hit the recent one on 2012, and then half a cycle. When it was in the summer solstice about 13,000 years ago, that's when Atlantis was said to allegedly have been destroyed. And it also talks about how Lemuria, some debate over whether it existed at the same time as Atlantis or came before Atlantis. Some people also say Lemuria and Mu are different. Other people say Lemuria and Mu are the same thing, so there's some confusion there. But there seems to be a consensus that there was Atlantis and Lemuria were extraterrestrial colonies on planet Earth, and then after the cataclysm, all hell broke loose, and some say it was because planet Earth was invaded by malevolent extraterrestrials. But from an archaeological standpoint, get into what you know about Atlantis and Lemuria, and then after that, get into what you know from an extraterrestrial standpoint.
Well, Atlantis and Lemuria aren't the main focuses of my research. My research is basically inspired by my studies in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, which really don't refer to Atlantis. That's an idea that comes from Greek philosophy. Many people think it began with Plato writing about it and hit some of his works. So, these ideas, and Lemuria was a concept that was invented in the 19th century. And, it's these aren't really the main focuses of my work. What I find interesting about them is that they refer to worldwide catastrophes that wiped out civilizations. And I think that's a fact. I think there have been periodic catastrophes that have wiped out human populations on various parts of the earth. That's something that is spoken about in the ancient Sanskrit writings. They involve a cyclical concept of time, and in between cycles there are devastations that take place. So I think that the basic concept behind Atlantis and Lemuria, namely that there have been advanced civilizations that have been destroyed by different kinds of catastrophes, either natural or artificial, is something that I'm prepared to accept. Also, the concept of extraterrestrials is something I'm prepared to accept, but my understanding of it may be a little bit different than that of many other people. I have kind of an expanded conception of what it means to be an extraterrestrial being. Some people, some researchers propose that whatever extraterrestrials there are were or are flesh and blood types of beings, just as we are. But as I said, I have an expanded conception of what it means to be an extraterrestrial, which may involve more subtle types of beings or spiritual entities that descend from higher levels of reality to the level which we inhabit. So my conception of extraterrestrials would include not only flesh and blood types of extraterrestrial beings from other planets, but higher dimensional beings that sometimes people use the name angels or gods or goddesses for. And I think the term extraterrestrial, the way that I use it, would include all of those different types of beings. And in one sense, I would say we're all extraterrestrials in the sense that we should have a proper understanding of what a human being really is. Like many scientists and people influenced by their ideas will tend to think today that a human being is just a machine made of matter and that's all there is to it. But I think that's only part of the story. Within that machine made of matter that we call our body, there is a conscious self that is non-material. It can exist apart from the body. It has an origin beyond the world of matter on what I call the level of pure consciousness. So as conscious beings, I think we're all extraterrestrials.
Yeah, I believe that too, that there is extraterrestrial in our genes. It's been said that we are genetic royalty on planet Earth because we're a whole different race of them. But I want to subject now of sunken cities, because that's what Atlantis and Lemuria are said to be, sunken cities, really large cities at that too. But there's a lot of sunken cities in the Mediterranean and elsewhere, like some people say Bimini Road and by the Bahamas is part of Atlantis. But from a forbidden archaeological standpoint, can you elaborate on specifically the sunken cities in the Mediterranean and why there's so many there, and then get into some detail about the rest of the sunken cities around planet Earth?
Well, the sunken cities aren't my main focus of research, but it's just a part of the general scientific understanding of the history on this planet, is that for the past 10 or 20,000 years, sea levels have been rising. And with that rising of sea levels, that means areas of the planet that were once inhabited, where there were settlements, are now under water. And of course, this fits in with the whole concept of Atlantis and Lemuria and things like that, the idea of sunken continents or sunken cities. Off the coast of India, there's a sunken city called Dwarka, which is described in the ancient Sanskrit text. It's stated that about 5,000 years ago it went under the water, and marine archaeologists have dived there and they have found the remains of a sunken city. So you can find such things also in other parts of the world. In the Mediterranean, there's the city of Alexandria on the coast of Egypt today on the Mediterranean Sea, but off the coast of Alexandria there are remains of sunken structures. So it's something that we can find in all parts of the world, because over the past 10 or 20,000 years, sea levels have been rising and covering inhabited areas. And it's still going on.
Yeah, and I would like to talk about, get into India stuff for a little bit, because I know that is your specialty, stuff involving India, because the Sanskrit text and your devotional name says it all too there. But I want to talk about the writings in the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita. Those two sources have been referenced countless times on the show Ancient Aliens, and Georgios Tsoukalos once said that he'd be out of a job in India because everybody there talks about extraterrestrials like it's everyday knowledge, which is kind of ironic, because here in America, which is supposed to be the land of the free, where you have free speech, you talk about extraterrestrials, you'll lose your job or tarnish your reputation. I think that's ridiculous. But anyway, why is India such a hotspot of extraterrestrial acceptance? And please, after you get into that, get into the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata, what they are and their connections with forbidden archaeology and history.
Well, the worldview of ancient India was that we exist in a multi-level cosmos that's inhabited by all kinds of beings. According to the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, there are 400,000 human-like species scattered throughout the entire universe, and some of them are humans like us, some of them are more subtle beings. We might call them not just extraterrestrial, but extra-dimensional beings. And these ancient writings, they also describe spacecraft. They were called Vimanas, and there were different types of them. They're mentioned in the Mahabharata. Bharata is the ancient of Bharata, or India. And the Bhagavad Gita is one chapter of the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata was an extensive work. It's actually a monumental work. It's just thousands of pages in its original form. And the Bhagavad Gita is a chapter of that book that deals specifically with the essence of spiritual philosophy. And it's known all over the world. Bhagavad Gita is known in many different countries. Mahabharata maybe not so widely known, but the Gita is very well known. So the descriptions in the Mahabharata and other ancient Sanskrit texts give a lot of information about Vimanas, spacecraft. So these things are very well known and among the population in general, so they're very accepting of these things. The idea that there are extraterrestrial beings, that they do visit the Earth, that sometimes they make use of Vimanas or spacecraft. Therefore, these ideas are in fact part of the culture in India even today.
Okay, and I want to get into more detail about the Vimanas, because they talked about on Ancient Aliens and also many shows on the UFO TV Studios YouTube channel. By the way, I do want to give a shout-out to that UFO TV Studios YouTube channel for doing a Forbidden Archaeology documentary that featured your work. Very interesting documentary. Recommend all of you listeners watch that. But in regards to Vimanas, they seem to say that the texts go in great detail about what the Vimanas were like and how they were powered. Could you get into that? What they describe in great detail, what they're like and how they're powered. Get into that, please.
Well, there were different kinds of vimanas used on different levels of the cosmos. We now inhabit a very dense level of the cosmos, and therefore the vimanas here are made of the denser energies. They're made of metal, they're made of the chemical elements, and rely on that. Some of the ancient Sanskrit texts make use of terms like mercury-powered engines for such craft. But then there are craft from more subtle dimensions of reality that were basically powered mentally by mental energies. And then there were vimanas or craft from the higher spiritual levels of reality that were powered by spiritual elements. So there are different kinds. There are some very interesting descriptions in a book called the Bhagavat Purana of a vimana that was used to attack a city on Earth. There was, according to the Mahabharata and other Sanskrit texts, there have always been forces of good and evil, of light and darkness, battling for control of the universe. It's been something that's been going on since time began. So thousands of years ago, there was a king on Earth named Shalva who was allied with the forces of darkness in the cosmos. So he was allied with these demoniac forces. So the engineer of these demoniac forces, a personality called Maya Danava, gave King Shalva a vimana made of metal in order so he could use it for his warfare on Earth. So this is kind of an example of extraterrestrial technology transfer, which we sometimes see described in some of the modern UFO alien types of literature. So this was going on in ancient times even, extraterrestrial technology transfer. This King Shalva got a spacecraft from the engineer of the demoniac forces in the universe, and he used it to attack Lord Krishna's city of Dwarka in India about 5,000 years ago. And he flew this vimana over the city and started raining down weapons to destroy the city. Some of the weapons, as they're described, they resemble energy beam weapons. They're described as being like lightning bolts. So the defenders of the city were trying to shoot this vimana, this spacecraft, down. It was a huge craft, according to the descriptions, and it could disguise its location by manifesting duplicate forms of itself so that the defenders of the city couldn't tell which was the real spacecraft. It was like there were several of them appearing at once. And this is something that's used in modern military technology and electronic warfare. If a missile warhead is coming down, it can display false radar images to the defending radar so that the radar defenses get confused. They can't tell what are the real warheads or airplanes and what are the false ones. So that appears to be a modern type of technology, but apparently it was existing thousands and thousands of years ago. So this airplane, this spacecraft, was doing that, manifesting several duplicate forms, appearing here, disappearing, appearing and disappearing. And eventually, however, it was shot down and it crashed into the ocean off the coast of Dwarka. And maybe that would be a place to look for remains of a crashed UFO.
Okay, in the Indian texts, how far back do they claim human history is?
They involve a cyclical concept of time, so there have been endless numbers of creations, not just one creation, not just one origin of the universe. There have been many origins of the universe. Universes come into existence, they go out of existence, they come into existence again and again in endless cycles of time. And during all of them, humans have been present. So the most recent creation cycle began about 2 billion years ago. So according to the ancient Indian historical text, humans have been present on Earth since that time, since that creation event began about 2 billion years ago. The creation event is called the Kalpa, or the Day of Brahma. It began about 2 billion years ago. It will continue for another couple billion years. So humans, according to these ancient Sanskrit texts, have been present for hundreds of millions of years on Earth. And there's archaeological evidence to support that. Now, modern scientists would say humans like us have only been present for less than 200,000 years.
Okay, and on the subject of human history on planet Earth, I'm going to need to elaborate for a few minutes on this, and you'll understand why when I'm done. But one subject that's been hotly debated in the history of extraterrestrial work is the accuracy of Zecharia Sitchin's work. And I need to elaborate for a moment on why that is so hotly debated. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here to my listeners because I've discussed this multiple times on the show, but this bears repeating. Andrew Bartzis, who has the rare ability to access universal Akashic records, stated in an interview that you can watch on the Creating 5D YouTube channel, this is in part 2, he made a statement that revolutionizes the way we look at human history on planet Earth. He said that Zecharia Sitchin's first 3 books were extremely accurate. He did say, however, that Sitchin's 4th book onward, Sitchin screwed up the timelines. I'm not going to really elaborate on that. But he also said that Anunnaki that do live on Nibiru did not come here on a personal mission. They were actually lured to Earth by other dimensional extraterrestrials, and apparently their planet Nibiru, which has its own consciousness, was lured here to Earth too. And the gold was not used to shield the atmosphere of their planet. It was used to lure entities to Earth who harness the gold as an energy source in some way. But yes, the Anunnaki, according to Sitchin, he's right about this, they did combine Homo erectus DNA with Anunnaki DNA to create Homo sapiens about 480,000 years ago. Sitchin was off by about 30,000 years, Andrew Bartzis said. Sitchin says 450,000. It was more than that. But the accuracy of Sitchin's work has been hotly debated because there has been a lot of information spewed about that Sitchin was both a CIA and an Illuminati operative. And to make things even more creepy, David Icke's 1999 documentary, Revelations of a Mother Goddess, Arizona Wilder, who was a mind-controlled slave of the Illuminati, said that she saw Sitchin at satanic Illuminati rituals. She said he was a shape-shifting reptilian alien who had the job of disinforming humanity about the reptilians and Illuminati. And David Icke said, well, that might explain why Sitchin warned me not to say anything about reptilian aliens in my work when I asked him not to say anything about why he didn't say anything about reptilian aliens from Sumeria in his work, because there were a lot of reptilian and serpent motifs from ancient Sumer, and Sitchin didn't say anything about that. Now, I put Andrew Bartzis right on the spot when I met him at the In 5D Return to Atlantis conference in Sarasota last October, and I asked him, I don't get it, Bartzis. How could Sitchin have been accurate if he was a reptilian disinformer? And Bartzis explained to me that extraterrestrial entities known as timeline watchers implanted stuff in this reality to present Sitchin as a fraud when he really wasn't a fraud, and those timeline watcher aliens did that because they did not want humanity to know that Sitchin was accurate. Now, I could talk more about this, but I've talked enough about this. Now that I've given my take on this and why I do believe that Sitchin was accurate, I do believe Bartzis. What do you have to say about all this stuff that I just said about Sitchin?
Well, if you look at my work, you see that I really don't get very much into discussing the ideas of other researchers in the alternative history and alternative archaeology field, because I feel people can read my books, they can read the books of other researchers, and they can make up their own minds about it. But if people ask me directly, even though it's not something that I would really do on my own, I feel I owe you an answer, so I'll answer your question. A lot of the different researchers in the alternative history and alternative archaeology field are inspired by different sources. Obviously, Sitchin was inspired by Sumerian sources. Some are inspired more by Egyptian sources. I'm inspired by Vedic sources from ancient India. So you're going to see some different takes on the evidence and the explanations. And I think some of those differences can be traced back to the source inspirations for the different researchers. I'll tell you what I have in common with Sitchin. I have in common with him the idea that the current explanations for human origins are wrong, the ones that are taught in the school. I also have in common with him the idea that extraterrestrial beings have something to do with the origin of our human species on this planet. But where I would differ is in the timeline. And I would say there's evidence that humans like us have been present on Earth for many, many millions of years. For example, there was a scientific report published in a scientific journal called The Geologist in the year 1862. It told of an anatomically modern human skeleton that was found 90 feet below the surface of the ground in Macoupin County in the state of Illinois, which is near St. Louis. And this layer of rock in which the skeleton was found, according to modern geologists, is about 300 million years old, which is from before the time of the dinosaurs even. So humans like us were existing on this planet far, far longer in the past than 300,000 or 400,000 years ago when the ape-man Homo erectus was existing. So that's basically my take on it, but I respect the right of people to make up their own minds about it. Like I said, normally in my books and my lectures, I don't get into criticizing the work of other researchers in the alternative archaeology field, but if somebody directly asks me a question, I try to answer it as best I can.
Yeah, that very much, and you're kind of different from me in that whole regard about criticizing other people's work. If I ever hear a contradiction in what researchers in the same field say, an alarm bell goes off in my head saying, aha, there's a contradiction. I need to find a way to address that publicly. So, I mean, I hope you don't have a problem with that. But
no, I don't. That's you're in a different. You've got a radio show and you've got to talk to a lot of different people. So I understand.
Yeah, thanks for understanding that. But one thing that many people don't understand is the whole thing about fossils and rocks being dated. I recently saw a documentary on YouTube where this guy said, I brought my daughter to a museum. It was a fossil museum, and his daughter asked the guy who was guiding the tour, said, how do you date fossils? And the guy said, we date fossils by the rocks they're in. And then about half an hour later, how do you date the rocks? The girl asked. And the guy said, we date the rocks by the fossils that are in the rocks. And the girl said, okay, this doesn't make any sense. And she pointed out the obvious contradiction. And the guy fessed up and said, well, I understand the contradiction, but I can't bring it to anybody's attention because if I expose this contradiction publicly, I would lose my job. Okay, so this whole thing about dating fossils and rocks through this contradictory method that I just explained, how are you supposed to date fossils and rocks, and how can we put a stop, to the best of your knowledge, about this ridiculous way that obviously can't be used to date rocks and fossils?
Yeah, well, I think obviously there is kind of a contradiction, between the two methods that you stated. Dating the in a circular fashion in the way that you were describing. Now, one way that scientists have developed for breaking out of that cycle is direct radiometric methods for dating the age of layers of rock, especially volcanic layers. There are different methods that allow them to do that. For example, volcanic deposits can be directly dated using the potassium-argon method, and other layers of rock can be dated by other radiometric methods. So if you find something that is solidly embedded in a layer of rock and you can show that it didn't come in there through some fissure or crack or some burial or something like that, that it really belongs in the layer of rock in which it's found, and you have dated the layer of rock, then that can give you an age for the bone or artifact that's in that layer of rock. Now, you could say, in reply to that, well, the dating methods are inaccurate. And that is, I run into that, like suggestion. But as far as I'm concerned, if scientists want to admit that all their radiometric dating methods are all wrong, then I win. Or if they want to admit that there are human bones, human artifacts, and footprints in layers of rock that have been dated by their radiometric methods as being millions of years old, I also win. So either way, I win. If they want to admit all their dating methods are wrong, fine. Then we don't know anything about anything. And that's okay with me. It means you can't support your current theories either. Or if you want to admit that there's a lot of evidence that contradicts your current theories, that's even better. So either way, I win.
Right. And I want to get into the whole thing about human fossils. We seem to have found all sorts of different species of human-type fossils on planet Earth. We got the Lucy, we got the Iceman, we've got the Star Child skull, and maybe this should be viewed as all the more confirmation that ET contactees are right when they say we are genetic royalty, like Alex Collier said his ET contacts told him that the reason the aliens are so interested in planet Earth is because we are genetic royalty. So based to the best of your knowledge, do you think, yes, all these different types of human fossils that we found and remains are signs that we are genetic extraterrestrial royalty? And what are the key things that you think people should know in regards to this whole subject of many different human fossils existing?
Well, I don't deny that all these types of fossil beings existed. Generally, what scientists try to do is arrange them in some sort of sequence, starting around 6 or 7 million years ago. They would say there isn't anything even remotely human before 6 or 7 million years ago, they would say. And they say around 6 or 7 million years ago, you get things very primitive, ape-man-like creatures between 2 and 3 feet tall. They call them Australopithecus, that are sort of a little bit more advanced than an ape or a monkey, and sort of a step towards something human. And then they would say around 2 million years ago, you get the first creatures that are kind of, you might even mistake them a little bit, for human, not completely human, but of the kind known as Homo erectus, or a little bit later, Neanderthal. And then finally they would say about 200,000 years ago, you get the first anatomically modern humans. So I would say all those types of creatures just coexisted with each other. there were humans like us millions of years ago coexisting with these different types of ape men. And, as far as I'm concerned, there could also be terrestrial, extraterrestrial hybrids. That's something that could happen. According to the ancient Sanskrit writings, there are 400,000 human-like species scattered throughout the universe. So I think the real picture is a lot more complicated than people think. I mean, people tend to want a very simple explanation. Maybe God created Adam and Eve right in the beginning, or the human beings evolved from the apes. They want either a simple creation account or a simple evolution account or a simple extraterrestrial account. The human beings were evolving, and then there was some genetic manipulation of Homo erectus, and it became a human being. I think the real story is a lot more complex, and it involves elements of all three of those things. Some kind of higher intelligence, supreme conscious intelligent being involved in the production of our species on Earth, an extraterrestrial element involving even terrestrial hybrids, and some kind of evolution going on, but not the type that Darwin talked about. So I think the real story is a very complex tapestry that we're not really able to trace out all the elements of it from the evidence that we now have before us. But one thing is clear: humans like us have been around for a lot longer than most scientists now believe possible, and also that human beings are something more than just machines made of molecules in competition with each other for survival. I think there is a non-material element to the human essence, and that is who we really are. We are beings of pure consciousness who have somehow or other come in contact with the material elements and become covered by them. In other words, matter does not produce consciousness. Consciousness has its own independent extraterrestrial origin, and somehow or other we've become associated with matter, and the purpose of human life is to restore consciousness to its original pure state beyond the world of matter.
Right. And before I get into that subject in more detail, I just want to say, if anybody wants to call in and ask Michael a question or talk about anything, the call-in number is 646-478-4747. Again, that's 646-478-4747. I had a caller on the board, area code 404. If you're listening, you're more than welcome to call back in. I was going to take your call, but I was in the process of asking a question, and sorry I didn't get you on. I couldn't get you on. But, hey, if anyone wants to call in, please do. But I would like to talk about that whole consciousness essence subject, because one area in Hinduism in regards to beliefs is reincarnation, and many people who aren't even religious that follow a metaphysics and consciousness and spirituality belief system that's free from religion but full of metaphysical beliefs say, yeah, there is such a thing as reincarnation. But, and there's a big but here, Andrew Barsis, that Akashic Records reader who I mentioned earlier in regards to Akashic Records and of Sitchin's work, being able to read Sitchin's work through Akashic Records, he actually said, yeah, reincarnation does exist, but it is not our friend. You do not want to be reincarnated because malevolent entities or extraterrestrials, whatever word you want to use, that are in control of our reality on planet Earth to some extent, imposed reincarnation as a consciousness and spirituality essence suppression system. When you die, you don't want to be reincarnated. You actually want to ascend to higher levels of consciousness, and reincarnation is a roadblock to that. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think there's an element of truth to that. The idea isn't to keep reincarnating. The conscious self by nature is eternal. It has no beginning. It has no end. But when it comes into contact with the world of matter, it takes on a material form, a body, that does have a beginning and an end. And consciousness identifies itself very heavily with that temporary body, and therefore it becomes subjected to all kinds of fears and anxieties, which can be exploited by those wanting to keep conscious selves in the world of matter, working and producing wealth and power for those who are into exploiting such things. So the idea of reincarnation should be, the goal of life should be to free oneself from the cycle of birth and death, free oneself from the cycle of samsara. But it may not be so easy. So it may take more than one lifetime in order to get completely free from that cycle of reincarnation by elevating consciousness, as the caller was saying, ascending out of the cycle of reincarnation. Yes, that should definitely be the goal, but if you don't achieve that in one lifetime, say if you make 5% progress towards the ultimate goal, then in your next incarnation, you'll start at that point. You're at the 5% point. And if you can finish the whole task in one lifetime, that's ideal. Become 100% free from reincarnation. That's the ideal thing. The only exception would be those very compassionate and merciful conscious selves that deliberately choose to remain in the world of matter to teach others and help them get out of the cycle of reincarnation. But otherwise, the goal definitely should be to get out of the cycle of birth and death in this material world.
Yes, and in this regards to consciousness, it said that humans, we are infinite consciousness, where everything that is, was, and ever will be, because space and time are illusions, reality is holographic. Every small part of the hologram is a smaller representation of the greater whole, and consequently, this means that everything has its own consciousness, but it's the whole thing about planets having their own consciousness. I'd like to talk about that for a moment, because it has been said by some people, among them UFO researcher John Lear and ET contactee George Kavasilis. I spoke to him about this when I interviewed him. They said that every planet does have its own consciousness filtering system, and the kicker is this allows for life to exist on the planet. Not only would this validate Sitchin's theories that the Anunnaki come from Nibiru, because all those people who say life can't exist on a planet that far from the sun like Nibiru is, well, no, every planet has its own filtering system, so life existing on it in some way is not a problem. Is there anything in the Hindu text that maybe say something about planets having their own consciousness and consequently their own filtering system to allow for life to exist on it? And can you say, yeah, this is probably what reality is and NASA is keeping this from us?
Yes. Each planet, each celestial body does have a conscious being associated with it. And this is reflected in a lot of the world's wisdom traditions. Like for the earth, the Greeks had the concept of Gaia, the earth goddess. In the ancient Sanskrit text, there's mention of an earth goddess. Her name is Bhumi, and her consciousness pervades the earth, just like our consciousness pervades our particular bodies. The consciousness of these higher beings who are responsible for the different celestial bodies and planets, their consciousness pervades their planetary body, you could say. And they do enable life to exist, other conscious beings to inhabit their realm. So I think both of those ideas are very, very important and very true, that each celestial body, each planet does have a conscious being associated with it, and that consciousness that pervades that planet or celestial body enables the other conscious entities to exist on that planet or other celestial body.
Yeah, and on a related note, it's also said that stars are hotspots, so to speak, on this consciousness filtering system, because it's been said that the whole theory about stars being powered by nuclear fusion is flat out wrong. In reality, stars are powered by a universal web of electromagnetic consciousness energy, and it's been said that this is the real reason why a corona of a star is so much hotter than the surface, because the energy actually comes from the outside. A nice analogy is, think of a house as a galaxy. The light bulbs are the stars, and the wiring throughout the house is this web of electromagnetic consciousness energy, which we cannot see for the same reason that we can't see dark matter. It exists outside visible light. Do you believe that the Hindu texts would, the Vedic texts also, and Sanskrit texts would validate this theory about this is what actually makes stars work?
There's a similar concept there. According to the Vedic cosmology, the ultimate reality is called Brahman, the spiritual sky. It's described as the effulgence of the body of Krishna, and it's a all-pervading spiritual energy that's characterized as being like an effulgence or light. And the material universes are in one corner of that Brahma-Jyoti, and they're in a realm of darkness. The luminaries within the dark material universes are said to be reflecting the energy of the Brahma-Jyoti. So that means somehow or other, even though the material universes are surrounded by walls of very dense energy that kind of cut off the direct shining of the spiritual sky or the Brahma-Jyoti, somehow or other the energy of the Brahma-Jyoti is reflected into the material universes and then expresses itself through what we call the light of the sun and the stars, like that. So it's a similar concept that there's an energy. In other words, these celestial bodies within the material universe, as you were suggesting from your sources, they're not generating their own energy independently. They're actually somehow or other connected to a higher energy source, the Brahman effulgence in the spiritual sky, which we can't perceive directly, but it's reflected through the sun, the stars, and other celestial bodies.
Yes, and one subject that comes up very much in regards to consciousness is the subject of timelines. Earlier you said you would differ with Zecharia Sitchin in the area of timelines. Now, the whole idea of there being multiple timelines is very much accepted in the metaphysics and also maybe even some religious communities too. And it's interesting to note that Akashic Records Reader Andrew Bartza says that there are 3 timelines now. There's the main organic one, and then there's what he calls an upper and a lower. Although in my interview with George Kavaslis, George said that there are those 3 timelines. They're a grouping of timelines, the upper and the lower ones, and he doesn't understand why Bartzus would choose 3 as his number of timelines. But it's also been said among those in the conspiratorial field that the governments have found a way to use time travel to manipulate timelines. And like Andrew Bartzus said, Sitchin's 4th book onwards were wrong because he got his timelines screwed up. What can you say about timelines from a standpoint of your research and also the ancient Indian texts?
Well, there are different time sequences at different levels of the cosmos. I was just reading an account in the Bhagavad Purana or Srimad Bhagavatam about a king on Earth who existed on Earth many millions of years ago. His name was Kakudmi, and he had a daughter, and he was wondering who would be the best husband for her. They had a system of arranged marriages at that time. And he was thinking, well, this prince looks like a pretty good guy. This king looks like a pretty good guy. But he decided, let me go from Earth to the topmost material planet in the material universe, Brahma Loka, where the demigod Brahma lives, and let me ask him. So he went with his daughter from Earth up through the different levels of the cosmos to Brahma Loka, the highest planet in the material universe. And when he got there, he came to the palace of Brahma. And the doorman met him and said, who do you want to see? And he said, I'd like to see Lord Brahma. And the doorman said, well, he's at a music concert right now, but he'll be out in just a short time. So King Kukudmi and his daughter waited a little bit. And then after a short time, Brahma came out from where he was at the concert and said, what can I do for you? And this King Kukudmi said, well, I was thinking about different possible husbands who would be suitable for my daughter, and there was this prince and that prince and this king and that king. And Brahma started laughing. And King Kukudmi said, why are you laughing like that? And he said, well, in the time you've been up here, millions of years have passed down on Earth. Actually, tens of millions of years. But he said, by the time you go back, when you go back, it'll be millions of years from when you came up here, but at that time there will be a certain person named Balaram, and I think he'd be the ideal husband for your daughter. So King Kukudmi and his daughter, they traveled back down to Earth. Millions of years had passed, and this personality, Balaram, was present on the Earth at that time, and the daughter, Revati, married him. What I find interesting is it sort of shows that at least it's possible to travel forward in time. I'm not so sure about traveling back in time, but I think forward leaping time travel is a definite possibility.
Well, since you asked, if you have any doubts about time travel into the past, there is no such thing as the grandfather paradox, because you go back in time and kill your grandfather, you won't vanish out of existence. You'll just create another timeline, which is independent of the timeline you originally came from. That's what some other people who I've interviewed on this subject have told me. If I do hope maybe that helps explain something in regards to time travel to you and some of the listeners. But moving on, I would like to get onto the subject of Lemuria, talk about it again. I know you don't research this much, but it has been said that when Atlantis and Lemuria collapsed, most of the people that settled in India migrated from Lemuria. The survivors did. And then the people that migrated from Atlantis, the survivors, they migrated to different parts of the world that were closer to the Atlantic. Is there anything in the Hindu texts that talk about people coming to India from a civilization in the past, and would it suggest that it was Lemuria and not Atlantis that happened?
Well, no, not really. This is what I said. Like, different researchers are inspired by different sources, either from maybe contactee type information or channeled information or different wisdom traditions, Sumerian, Egyptian, whatever. So they may give different accounts. As I said, I'm more directly inspired by the ancient Sanskrit texts themselves, and they don't directly mention anything like that. What the parallels would be that they do mention periodic devastations after which the earth has to be repopulated from higher levels of the cosmos. It's something like what people today call cloud computing. In other words, many people today, they have their computer programs and files and pictures and songs and videos stored on the cloud, so to speak, so that if the particular device, smartphone or computer that they're using becomes destroyed or inoperable, well, it doesn't create a problem because you just get a new device and then you can still download all your files and programs and pictures and everything from the cloud. So apparently the Earth is something like that. There are periodic devastations where life, including human life, is wiped out on Earth. But at higher levels of the cosmos, there are beings called Prajapatis, generators of population, who have the wherewithal, they have what's needed to repopulate the Earth with humans, plants, animals, whatever forms of life need to be reintroduced after these big devastations. So there are things like that mentioned, not exactly what you're talking about, but what I consider to be parallel ideas that may be related somehow.
Okay, switching gears. The subject of nuclear technology being used in antiquity. It has been said on the show Ancient Aliens, among other sources, that Sodom and Gomorrah, they did actually exist, and what was told in the Bible is a nuclear disaster, and the evidence for that is if you go to where Sodom and Gomorrah are said to be the ruins of, well, first of all, if you can confirm, is there really proof that those places in question are Sodom and Gomorrah, and is there nuclear evidence there of nuclear weapons from antiquity, and where else around the world can you find evidence of nuclear weapons being used in antiquity?
Well, I haven't personally investigated Sodom and Gomorrah myself, so I can't really speak to that. What I can say is that the ancient Sanskrit writings of India contain descriptions of weapons that resemble modern nuclear weapons and their effect. They were called Brahmastras. And when you read the descriptions of these Brahmastras, it said that when they are set off, when they explode, it's like you would have millions of suns all gathered together in one place, which pretty much does resemble the effect of a modern thermonuclear bomb going off. And they, it's interesting that Dr. Robert Oppenheimer, who was the physicist in charge of developing the atomic bomb for the United States during the Second World War, was, in addition to being a great physicist, he was also a student of the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, and he was aware of these descriptions of these weapons. And when the first atomic bomb was tested at Alamogordo in New Mexico in 1945, he was in the bunker, and when he saw it go off, he started quoting some Sanskrit text from the Bhagavad Gita, and that referred to this idea of having a million suns in one place and of like destroying all the world with its radiation, and he was asked later what it was like to be present when the first atomic bomb was set off, and he said he corrected the reporter by saying the first in modern times. So there are descriptions of weapons resembling modern atomic weapons in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, and there are even some claims that at a 5,000-year-old archaeological site called Mohenjo-Daro, there are signs that some of the buildings, which were made of brick and stone, were vitrified. Now, I haven't been there. This place, Mohenjo-Daro, is in what's now the country of Pakistan, which is a pretty dangerous place to visit these days, so I haven't been there to verify this myself, but there are claims that some of the structures in the excavated 5,000-year-old city there display signs of vitrification. So vitrification means if you've got sand or stone or something like that, it becomes melted. Just like at the place where the first atomic bomb in the American program was set off at Alamogordo. When it was set off, the desert sands kind of melted, vitrified, became vitrified, in other words. So there are claims that there are features like that at Mohenjo-Daro in the Indian subcontinent in the present country of Pakistan. But I haven't been there to personally verify it myself.
Okay, one thing I want to talk about in regards to what the ancient Sanskrit texts say about how technology was used to construct all these magnificent temples and monuments and pyramids. In the case of the Giza pyramids in Egypt throughout history, they say, and Ancient Alien supports this, you would have to use some acoustic technology to either use sound or some consciousness energy of some sort to move these blocks, these humongous 800-ton blocks in some cases, to stack them up and build the things that they did without cranes and wheels and pulleys in some cases. And do the Sanskrit texts talk about that kind of technology and also other technology that was used to build the monuments and temples?
Yes, it is mentioned in some places that there were personalities, yogis, who by vibrating sound were able to construct or manifest whole cities and different kinds of structures. Sometimes it said they would bring structures from extraterrestrial sources and bring them down to Earth and manifest them here. So that would also happen. So yes, there is mention that there were personalities who by, I don't know what you would call it, sonic technology or thought vibrations, were able to manifest structures and objects. And I think the whole aspect of, I mean, the sounds they used were called mantras. And I think there is a kind of mantra technology that could be used to manifest objects. And I think, sound does have a lot of power to it. They're able to use ultrasound now to do welding. You can weld metal with ultrasound. You can use ultrasound for sterilizing objects in hospitals and medical institutions. You can use sound as a weapon. Sound has a lot of power to it, and I don't think we're finished exploring all the different kinds of power that are there in sound vibration.
Okay, and I'd like to talk about something that's really on the far out edge here of forbidden archaeology. The whole idea of the Earth being hollow, which I subscribe to. It has been said, and there are actually pictures that have been taken where you can see the holes at the poles of the Earth that Admiral Byrd supposedly flew into. Well, that's not a myth. That is the truth. He did fly there, and those holes at the poles, they can be seen in a few pictures that somehow managed to get put in encyclopedias. And it makes sense because as the Earth spins, when clothes in a dryer spin around, the clothes go to the outside, and there's a hole in the middle. Likewise, you would expect a spinning planet. All the material would go to the outside, and you would have like a hole in the middle, although the thing with a planet is the pressure from all the energy of the material that formed there before the Earth started spinning. All the pressure caused that to form like a miniature star, meaning that the core of the Earth is not iron like mainstream science tells us it is. It's actually a mini star of sorts, and there is actually higher dimensional life, they say, in this hollow Earth, which those in the metaphysics community call Agartha, and these higher dimensional humans that live in the Earth, it's not like a system of caves. It's actually like here on planet Earth, but it's daylight all the time. There is no night. But these higher dimensional ETs, or should I say humans, although some might call them ETs because they're like not of this surface Earth, they don't need as much sleep, so it's not a problem that they're living in the daytime all the time. Do the ancient Sanskrit texts talk about there being a hollow Earth that has real life, higher dimensional life in it?
Not exactly in the terms that you're describing it, but they do talk about subterranean places that are below the... See, they have a concept of the Earth that's a little bit different than the modern scientific concept, but there is the concept that there are different levels of reality. There are subterranean, what they call subterranean levels of reality that are inhabited by different types of beings. But it's not something that I have really studied. You could say there might be a whole topic of forbidden geology, so to speak. But I have to confess I haven't really looked deeply into that whole topic, but there are some parallel ideas, the idea of subterranean inhabited levels of reality that are there in the ancient Sanskrit text.
Okay, and in regards to the ancient Sanskrit texts, talking about otherworldly areas, there are many different areas throughout the cosmos that often come up. You got when it comes to malevolent aliens, you got Draco, Orion, and Hydra. When it comes to benevolent aliens, you got the Pleiades. There are some benevolent species, they say, from Orion, and there's also from the Arcturus, and I could go on, but in regards, because there's a whole slew of different theories as to where good and bad extraterrestrials come from. But just for the sake of your research, do the texts actually specify specific areas of the cosmos, star systems, where the good and the bad ETs come from?
Yes, they're all extraterrestrials, and they have different planets that they inhabit. But see, sometimes the control of the planets can change hands. In other words, the what are called the two basic types, the good and the bad forces within the universe, are called suras and asuras. Sura means godly, asura means ungodly. And sometimes the asuras take over the planets that are inhabited by the suras and vice versa. So sometimes they're changing hands. So it's not constant that you can say the good ones are coming from here and the bad ones are coming from there. Sometimes the planetary systems described in the Vedic cosmology, they change hands. For example, there was an entity called Hiranyakashipu, who was on the side of the forces of darkness and took over practically the whole universe at one point. Just like we could see in the history of the world, sometimes a certain power will take over a whole lot of countries and then be driven out. So the situation in the cosmos at large seems to be the same. Sometimes the different parts of the cosmos are changing hands in terms of who's in control of them.
Right, and in regards to being in control, there seems to be a little debate over what role humanity is playing on planet Earth. Some people say that humans are neutral pawns in a war between malevolent and benevolent entities, or extraterrestrials, if that word makes sense. Other people say that humans are under the control of malevolent forces, while at the same time benevolent forces are here to help humanity and make sure that the malevolent forces don't control us too much. So there is a little bit of a disagreement there in some sense. Some say the bad guys control us and the good guys are here to help us. Others say, no, there's equal control. We're just neutral pawns in a good and bad ET war. What do the Sanskrit texts, which side would they support?
They would support the side that the humans on this planet are free agents who can choose to ally themselves with the forces of good or the forces of evil, or of darkness. So that is up to the individuals. Each individual conscious self has free will, and they can ally themselves with either the forces of light or the forces of darkness. And they're both trying to exert their influence on Earth.
Okay.
So I don't know, does that fit in with one of the choices that you gave me? That we're not just pawns. We each have free will, and we can ally ourselves with either the forces of light or the forces of darkness, which are both trying to influence the course of affairs on this planet.
Yeah, but well, I think you answered it pretty well. It's just that, yeah, we do have free will. We do create our own reality because we're infinite consciousness. But the problem is on planet Earth, it's a prison planet for all intents and purposes, so it's really hard to live on. The evidence for that, many would say, is the fact that, well, we are infinite, but yet we seem to be like so lost in a matrix, trapped in a matrix, because our bodies should be crystalline if we're infinite. We should be made of more light, and we shouldn't have to go through a system of enslavement where we have to keep working just to survive with little time to enjoy many of the good things in life. I mean, this is evidence that we're trapped in some sort of a matrix, they say, and malevolent forces are doing this because we are infinite. We shouldn't be in this matrix. So do the text support the idea that we are trapped in a matrix that keeps our free will in check?
Yeah, but it's something like this. Originally, we're all beings of pure consciousness who are meant to exist in loving harmony with each other, with all other conscious beings, and with the source of all conscious beings on what I call the level of pure consciousness. But if a conscious self becomes egotistical, which means it wants to dominate, control, and exploit others for its own selfish purposes, it can no longer exist in that harmonious state. And there has to be some other place for it to act out its desires to dominate, control, and exploit others. And that is this material world, which is like a virtual reality system where conscious selves act out their desires to dominate, control, and exploit others. Now, it's also a place where it's possible to restore consciousness to its original state. So some conscious selves are trying to get back to that original condition of understanding, hey, we're all beings of pure consciousness, we're all meant to exist in loving harmony with each other, let's get to that position. And then there are others who are trying to get more and more deeply involved in the domination, control, exploitation mentality and mode, and they're trying to keep things pushed in another direction. So that's basically how I see it. We're kind of in a little virtual reality system where we can either restore our consciousness to its original pure state or get more and more deeply entangled in the illusions of domination, control, exploitation, etc.
Okay, and do the texts support the idea that we are here because we chose to be here so we could learn and go through all these hardships on this prison planet known as Earth to ascend? Do the texts say we chose to be here?
We chose to become selfish, egotistical, domineering, exploitive, etc. We may not have imagine that this would be the result of it, but that is in fact the result of it.
Okay, because some people say ET abductions, it's not an abduction because you chose to get abducted, so to speak, before you incarnated on this earth. I just want to clarify that's basically what I'm trying to say there. But moving on to another subject, I want to talk about the subject of Anunnaki for a moment. Most people are familiar with this with the work of Sitchin, but many people become confused about what the Anunnaki actually is. It's not one specific race of ETs like Sitchin researchers might think. That is just one faction of Anunnaki, the one from Nibiru. The term Anunnaki refers to a hodgepodge of both malevolent and benevolent entities or extraterrestrials that are the children of a universal geneticist known as Anu. And the Anunnaki from Sitchin's work are, for the most part, malevolent, which makes sense because they treated us like a slave species. But do the Sanskrit texts, even though they don't mention the term Anunnaki, because that's a Sumerian term, do they support this idea that, yeah, there is a race of ETs that's a hodgepodge mishmash of, like, children of a universal geneticist?
Well, here's how it would go. Originally, we all exist as beings of pure consciousness on what I call the level of pure consciousness. If the conscious self becomes egotistical, it can't exist in that state anymore. So it needs a place where it can act out its desires to dominate, control, and exploit. And that is the material universe. Now, when a conscious self comes here, it can't use its form of pure consciousness, because consciousness, according to this explanation, has an original form called a swarupa, which is eternal, full of knowledge, full of pleasure. It can't use that form for the purposes of existence in the material universe, which is a place for domination, control, exploitation, competition, and all of those things. So it needs another form. So it's given a form made of matter. Say, just like a normal human being lives on the land. If you want to exist in an alien element like water, you need a vehicle that will let you function in the water. You need a submarine or a diving suit. So on the level of pure consciousness, we have our swarupa, original form of pure consciousness, but if we come into the world of matter, we need a vehicle made of matter that will allow us to function on this level of reality. So those vehicles are provided by higher beings in the cosmos who are known as Prajapatis, generators of material bodies. And they generate these bodies by a process of reproduction. So bodies are vehicles for conscious selves. And they are generated, these bodies are generated by the reproductive activities of the Prajapatis. And once the first ones are produced on this level of reality, the first human bodies, they go on to reproduce themselves. When the plant bodies are produced, they go on to reproduce themselves. The fish bodies are produced, they go on to reproduce themselves. So there are millions of types of bodies that are generated by the Prajapatis as vehicles for conscious selves on this level of reality. So the human vehicle is considered the most valuable one because it's in the human vehicle that a conscious self can transfer itself out of the prison of the material universe and go back to the level of pure consciousness. So these higher beings called Prajapatis are the ones who generate by their reproductive activities the bodily vehicles for the conscious selves on the different planets in the material universe. So there is a kind of cosmic genetic engineering that produces the bodily vehicles for the conscious selves who enter the, as you aptly called it, the prison of the material universe.
Okay. And speaking of aliens,
little bit different story, but it has some common features.
Right. And I want to stick with aliens for a moment here, because one area of extraterrestrial research, actually that one thing that's used to help extraterrestrial research and UFO research is remote viewing. It always seems like there's a link between aliens, UFOs, and remote viewing. And remote viewing is possible because we are infinite consciousness. You can use your consciousness to see anything at any time, anywhere, because space and time are illusions. It's that simple. It's just that some people are better at it than others, because our star seed extraterrestrials, so to speak, blessed certain people with that ability. But two things that are very intriguing in regards to remote viewing and extraterrestrial specifically. Jim Marrs, in his book Alien Agenda, talked about in the remote viewing chapter how the CIA trained remote viewers, and two remote viewers who did not know each other were trained to perceive an extraterrestrial council of sorts, and they gave very remarkable descriptions that were consistent in regards to the alien council in question, as well as the ziggurat-shaped structure that this benevolent ET council that they were viewing was in, holding council in. And on the UFO TV Studios YouTube channel, there is a documentary that's basically a beginner's guide to how to do remote viewing. It won't make you a remote viewer overnight, but it's a nice beginner's guide nonetheless. And during the question and answer session, the guy who was the remote viewer said, yeah, remote viewers have seen that there are, for all intents and purposes, angels, not Christian or religious angels in any sense. It's just that's the perfect phrase to describe them, because they are mostly made of light. Their bodies are more crystalline than ours. They can float around because they're much less mass, and they usually don't get involved in our reality unless we ask them to, because they're guardian angels. But if the situation is dire, they have the ability, these guardian angels do, to, among other things, implant thoughts in people's minds so the situation at hand doesn't become so dire. So do the texts support any of this stuff about remote viewing being possible and alien councils and guardian angels?
Yes, they do. But I'm going to have to take a few seconds break here to get a little bit of relief from a bladder thing, and I'll be right back with you. Is that okay?
Perfectly understandable. Well, bless Michael for his honesty there. I actually had to take a bathroom break myself when I was a guest on the radio show of Elizabeth Mulligan, Diamonds Forever show, this past Saturday. And during a tape she was playing, I had to run to the bathroom myself. So cut Michael a break. It's perfectly understandable. That's what happens when you do shows over an hour. But, remote viewing, I tried to learn how to do it. I don't know. I don't know if I'm made out to be a remote viewer. We can all do it. It's just that certain people have the ability to harness it more than others. And Linda Moulton Howe in research project that she was presenting about on the UFO TV Studios YouTube channel talked about how UFOs were seen. Actually, not.
Sorry for that interruption, Andrew.
Yeah. I was just talking about how Linda Moulton Howe was using remote viewing to see, she wasn't using it, but she knew people that used it to see UFOs in the ground and military bases, but that's not what we're talking about here. Moving on to remote viewing, seeing alien councils and guardian angels. Is there anything in the text about that?
Yeah, I definitely think remote viewing is a possibility. Actually, once a couple of years ago, I was speaking at a conference that Stephen Schwartz was also speaking at. He was involved in some of the original remote viewing work that was contracted by Stanford Research Institute for the United States government. He was part of that program, and he was having a little workshop at this conference. I mean, he came to my lecture, I came to his, and he was saying pretty much as you're saying, that this remote viewing ability is an ability that we all have, and some people have it to a greater extent than others, but we've all got it. And he did a little exercise. There were about 100 of us there, and he selected 3 people from the group, told them to go anywhere they wanted in the city within a 15-minute mile driving radius. He gave them a camera and said, go to the place, take some video of it, and then spend about 15 minutes there and then come back. So meanwhile, back in the hotel where we were sitting, after about 15 minutes, he asked, because the idea was that these people were going to be mentally sending back the image of the place where they were at. And, after they got to where they were, those of us in the hotel, Stephen Schwartz asked us, okay, just write down the first image that comes to your mind. And, the first, he said, don't question it, don't analyze it, just write it down. So the first image that came to my mind was candle flames in red glass holders. And so I just wrote it down. My mind was resisting it like anything because I thought the people had gone to a bowling alley. I was convinced mentally they had done that. But okay, I wrote it down. Then we were kind of asked to visualize, what do you see when you look forward? What do you see when you look back, when you look up, when you look down? I wrote it all down. And then later the people came back and they put, Stephen Schwartz took the videotape from their camera, put it in a projector, and the first image that came onto the screen was candle flames in red glass holders. So I was just shocked. I believe in this stuff, but they'd gone to a cathedral in Montreal. That's the city we were in. So it was just really pretty amazing. So the ancient Sanskrit texts, they do talk about this remote viewing ability. It was a yogic power, a mystic power that yogis possessed. And technically it's called Dur Darshana. So Dura means at a distance, Darshana means to see. And actually the Indian national television network is called Doordarshan. It's sort of named after this mystic power. So it is described that people who have this power, who have this, sometimes it's called divine vision, can perceive the activities of higher beings in the cosmos. Usually they're not visible to ordinary people, but people who have acquired these higher levels of perception, either through this darshan power, this remote viewing power, or through other means, can perceive this. Actually, according to the Bhagavad Gita, the text of the Bhagavad Gita was received through this remote viewing and remote hearing power. Actually, the scene of the Bhagavad Gita was a battlefield just before a great battle was to take place at a place called Kurukshetra in India. And at that time, Lord Krishna and Arjuna were having a conversation. So Arjuna was asking Krishna questions, and Krishna was replying to them. And the record of that conversation is the Bhagavad Gita. But how was this received? Well, there was a blind king named Dhritarashtra who was in his camp several miles from the battlefield, and he wanted to know what was going on the battlefield. So his secretary, Sanjaya, had this remote viewing ability. So he used his Durdarshana and Durshravana powers to hear the conversation between Lord Krishna and Arjuna miles away on the battlefield. He could see it and hear it, and it was recorded, and that's how we get the Bhagavad Gita. So, yes, these remote viewing and remote hearing powers are described in the ancient Sanskrit text, and sometimes they were employed in a way that allowed those who had these powers to see beings and hear beings that ordinarily a human being with normal sense perception wouldn't be able to perceive.
Okay. One thing I want to talk about here, two things in one sitting if possible. There's a lot of mystery in the regards to what is the big deal with crop circles and cattle mutilations. And yeah, I'm going to ask you to explain if the Sanskrit texts talk about any of this stuff. But first of all, it has been said that crop circles is a percentage factor. It has been said most of them are actually made by ETs that are trying to guide humanity in a specific direction by implanting a crop circle design that has an effect on the Earth and humanity on Earth at a subconscious level to guide us in a specific direction. There are some crop circles that are made by secret government technology, and there are also some that are made by the consciousness of Mother Earth. And I want to know if maybe the texts talk about crop circles or anything related to that. And also there's a great mystery of cattle mutilations, like some people say, like Linda Moulton Howe is basically convinced it's a genetic harvest of some sort, but then she's like, oh, but to what end? So using your knowledge of the Sanskrit text, can you talk about crop circles and cattle mutilations, and what are they really?
I don't have any knowledge of anything that's directly there in the Sanskrit text about crop circles. What I do have is, some information that early in the 20th century, scientists on Earth were thinking how they could communicate with intelligent beings in other parts of the solar system or the universe. And one thing they were thinking of doing, this was actually proposed by some scientists, is that they could make representations of the Pythagorean theorem by cutting patterns into the forest in places like Siberia, where there are huge pine forests. In other words, make a geometric representation of the Pythagorean theorem and cut it out in forest, and then plant the cut-out areas with wheat or some crop that would later show up as yellow against the green. In other words, scientists on Earth were thinking of using geometrical symbols cut into vegetation as a means of communicating with extraterrestrial intelligences. So it's not so surprising to me that maybe extraterrestrials thought, well, maybe that would be a good way to communicate with humans on this planet. Or it could be, as Linda Moulton Howe says, it could be the Earth Spirit herself, the Earth Goddess herself, who is manifesting these things. Or it could be some kind of scientific thing that's going on. The cattle mutilations sound to me, from the Vedic standpoint, to be a demoniac activity that actually, according to the Vedic system, cows are very valuable creatures. We get from them milk, which we can turn into yogurt and butter and things like that, and the the bulls can be used for plowing and transport and things like that. So they were actually quite valuable for having a natural way of life, and therefore the demoniac forces in the universe who didn't want to see people living simple, natural, spiritual lives would sometimes try to kill the cows. So that's definitely a sign of some kind of demoniac intelligence in operation. Exactly what it is in modern terms, I can't say, but from the standpoint of the Vedic text, that would be a sign of the forces of darkness operating somehow on this Earth planet.
Okay, and speaking of the forces of darkness, by the way, we have about 15 minutes left, and I'd like to end it on this note, something that I discussed with Jason Martell when I had him on my show recently. I would like to, since you've been a recent guest on a frequent guest on the show, Ancient Aliens, I would like to tell you the reason why I personally have a love-hate relationship with the show Ancient Aliens, and that I'd like to get your take on it. The reason I have a love-hate relationship with the show Ancient Aliens is I've seen every episode of it, and I'm pretty sure that in general, for the most part, when it comes to actual historical events, that extraterrestrials were involved in, the show is, for the most part, pretty accurate. But the reason I have a hate-em relationship, of a sense, with the show Ancient Aliens is because I am pretty sure that the show is, to some extent, a disinformation campaign, and I'd like to get into the reasons why. First of all, the religion aspect. Michael, with all due respect to your religious faith, and I have the utmost respect for the right to freedom of religion, I do believe that taking up a religion is not a good idea, because if you follow a higher belief system that says you must worship a higher deity, you will suppress your consciousness because you are infinite consciousness. In other words, you are what some would call God, because you're infinite, and you can't realize that if you worship some higher deity. And I have no doubt that many of the religious stories that the show Ancient Aliens says are real-life events, they're not real events. They're actually fictional stories that were created by malevolent extraterrestrials to suppress human consciousness, and the fact that religions teach benevolent things is a complete and total illusion. And this leads into the second reason why I have a hate-em relationship of sorts with Ancient Aliens. I have no doubt that David Icke is right when he says that many of our political and corporate leaders are actually members of a race of malevolent reptilian aliens who are masquerading behind the holographic mask of a human so they can literally feed off the energy we emit when we are in a state of fear, so they have to manipulate our reality in negative ways through politics and other business activities too to do that. And I also subscribe to the idea that malevolent gray aliens from Orion and also Zeta Reticuli are in on this Draco Hydra Reptilian alliance with it's also the Greys from Orion and Zeta Reticuli and the Anunnaki from Nibiru are also part of this alliance. And because the show Ancient Aliens has only mentioned like 2 instances of reptilian aliens on Earth and only 1 instance of reptilian aliens shape-shifting into humans, I'm thinking they should have mentioned this a lot more than that, and this has led me to think that the powers that be in these Draco-Reptilian Orion Grey Alliance have put people in positions of power on the History Channel staff and the show Ancient Alien staff to make sure that the show does not expose too much information. So when I told this to Jason Martell, he said, "Andrew, I love you, man, but you sound like a lunatic." Now, what do you have to say about all this stuff I just said?
Well, just like you said in the beginning about me, that you would respectfully disagree, I would have to respectfully disagree with you. And I do respect the right of you or any other person to come to their own conclusion about existence of God and ancient aliens and whatever else. Just as long as they don't use government to impose their ideas on everyone. If it's just a person expressing his ideas and to another person, fine. But I wouldn't say you've got the right to impose your ideas on everyone by convincing government to give you a monopoly in the education system or the communication systems. So that's fine. I would just respectfully disagree with some of the things that you said. Of course, even myself, I have my own take on ancient aliens. I think I appeared on about 10 episodes briefly. I don't know if I was anywhere near one of their more frequent guests. I haven't seen all the episodes of the show. What I tried to get across to them, and which they never broadcast what I actually said, was that the idea of ancient aliens and gods or God are not necessarily contradictory. I think both things can be there. There can be ancient aliens, flesh and blood extraterrestrials who have come and visited this planet from wherever, and there can be gods and goddesses and ultimately a supreme conscious being who is the source of everything. So we can all admit each of us is conscious. I'm conscious, you're conscious, we're individual, we're personal, but I don't think that any one of us is the ultimate, infinite, all-powerful God. I think we're part of that, just like a spark is part of a fire, but it's not the whole fire. I think you're a drop of the ocean is part of the ocean, but it's not the whole ocean. So I think we have a spiritual essence to us, an essence of consciousness, but it's not infinite, it's finite. If it's in line with the purposes of the actual infinite, then it can act in harmony with the purposes of the infinite conscious source of everything. That's what I would see, and that I think reflects the actual reality. I know you're going to disagree with that, and I respect that, but you asked me what I thought. So I agree with you. Ancient aliens isn't the end-all and be-all of everything, but I think we have different ideas about our ultimate identity.
Okay, and since I mentioned that whole malevolent alien alliance, if you don't want to get into the subject of reptilian aliens because it's way out of your area of research, that's fine.
Well, no, I could talk about it.
Yeah, but because of the Nagas, David Icke has written strong evidence in his books that the Nagas that you're familiar with, I'm sure, are a direct reference to the reptilians.
No, I was going to say there are mentions of shape-shifting reptilian beings in the ancient Sanskrit writings. There are, so I'm not disagreeing 100% with what you're saying at all. I think there are the Nagas are mentioned there. There's mention of a king Nriga who was turned into a reptile and then turned back into a human. Yeah, so there are mentions of shape-shifting entities in the Vedic text, including shape-shifting reptilian kinds of entities. Yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah, and aside from that, can you elaborate on serpent and reptilian motifs throughout the archaeological record and the statues and structures throughout India? Are they pretty prominent?
Yes. For example, there are many representations of Vishnu, especially, say, the Mahavishnu. The Mahavishnu is the ultimate creator god. Beyond Mahavishnu, there's a transcendental god, but the Mahavishnu is breathing in and out. And when he breathes out, millions of universes come out of his body. When he breathes in, millions of universes contract and go back into his body. But he's lying on a serpent bed, and this serpent is a personality. It's a multi-headed serpent who is known as Ananta Shesha. And sometimes this Ananta Shesha, who exists as the serpent bed of Mahavishnu, becomes a person within this world and manifests as a person, as an avatar. So, but you can see many representations in art and sculpture of Vishnu lying on a serpent bed. It's a very prominent figure in Indian art and architecture and religious worship. And there are also representations of a serpent being, an intelligent serpent being called Kaliya. There are representations of the different Nagas, as you were explaining. Kaliya was actually one of them. So you often see representations of these things in Indian temple art and sculpture.
Okay, we got about 5 minutes left, so I just realized I have some questions in the chat room. Sean Cohen wants me to ask, can you ask Dr. Cremo about the animal kingdom on Earth? Who created them? Angels, fish and fowl, plants? Is there a God who created the animal kingdom, or were they all created by various soul groups in the astral world?
They were generated by the higher beings called Prajapatis, generators of population, who generate bodily vehicles for the conscious selves who come into the material worlds. They manifested a wide variety of vehicles: human vehicles, plant vehicles, animal vehicles, insect vehicles, fish vehicles, because different conscious selves are on different levels of awareness, and they receive bodily vehicles suited to their level of awareness and consciousness. So, yes, the bodies of the living things that we see on this level of reality, the terrestrial level of reality, were originally generated by higher beings, demigods called Prajapatis, according to the ancient Sanskrit text.
Okay, and is that true with the plants and the amoebas and those creatures?
All of them. Plants, amoebas, any type of body, whether it's an amoeba, a plant, a fish, a bird, a human being, any other type of animal. Any body is a vehicle for a conscious self. So all these vehicles were manifested by the Prajapatis, the generators of populations.
All right. We got about 3 minutes left, so I guess I'll quickly cover this. UFOs. Most researchers, many people don't agree with this, but most of them do, that the majority of UFOs we see today, in the present day, are actually of a malevolent nature, because the majority of them belong to the military-industrial complex, which many claim is under the control of malevolent extraterrestrials. There are other UFOs that we see that are benevolent ETs, and some UFOs come from different timelines, and some UFOs are, that's basically the gist of it. Most of them are the military-industrial complex. Don't have time to get into the other things, but based on your research in the Sanskrit text, do malevolent or benevolent forces for the majority control the Vimanas and other UFOs? You got 2.5 minutes.
We have to keep in mind the time cycles. According to the Vedic cosmology, time goes in cycles called yugas. During the first yuga, the Satya Yuga, everything is very spiritual, very nice, very benevolent, and the Vimanas or UFOs that come would be mostly under the control of the powers of goodness. However, we're now existing in the fourth yuga, which is called the Kali Yuga, which is a demoniac age, an age of darkness. So a lot of the UFOs and the similar type of phenomenon are going to be under the powers of darkness. But the forces of goodness are still there, and they occasionally manifest. But if you're talking about the general trend, most of what we see going on today in the UFO field is craft that are under the control of the forces of darkness.
Right. I'm glad you were able to use the cyclical aspect of your research there to clarify that. Most of the other people I've asked this to on my show didn't get into it that way. That was quite an interesting way of looking at it, the cycle aspect. But we are unfortunately out of time. Can't answer any more questions. Michael, it's great having you on. I'm glad I was able to bring up some contradictions with your work and other people's work. That's one of the things I like to do on this show, to expose the true nature of reality. You were very informative. You know what you're talking about, and I'm going to take this moment to tell you the same thing I tell all my guests. There are some guests I would love to have on my show more than once. In fact, I'd love to have on my show more than once, including you. The problem is I have made a resolution to try to get as many different people on this show as possible before I start giving any one specific guest double dips, because that's the best way to do it as far as I'm concerned. So don't expect a call from me in the near future to be on my show again. There's a lot of other fascinating individuals who deserve some glory on my radio show.
Okay. Thanks for having me on. And can I give a website if people are interested in following up?
Yeah. You got 60 seconds.
mcremo.com, mcremo.com. There they can find out about upcoming interviews and lectures, information about my books like Forbidden Archaeology, Human Devolution, and so on. So thanks a lot.
You're very welcome, Michael. It was a pleasure having you on. Take care now.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, folks, I hope you found that very informative. I certainly did. I said I wanted to do it from mostly an archaeological perspective, but I couldn't because, well, ETs were going to come up. Well, maybe we did mostly do it from an archaeological perspective, but it is so obvious there was ET involvement with all the structures and everything, and I'm very glad I was able to get that involved and mix the two in conversation here. But in regards to next week's show, I will have Joe Mara on. He was supposed to come on my show, but some conflicts came up. He is a Reiki master and healer. He will be on my show next week and on April 2nd. So tune into that. We may even do a healing there. He's done some healings on Alfred Weber's YouTube channel. You might want to check that out if you're ever interested. So without further ado, namaste, everybody.